Hello, Brubs. We're back with A Mother in History. Marguerite Oswald, the mother of the man who killed Kennedy. You like that shaking? By Jean Stafford. These are just the appendices. 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 Mrs. Oswald claims that the famous picture of Lee Harvey with his gun was fabricated. And she said, well, actually, my son has never been indicted for the murder of President Kennedy. That's true. Officer Tippit or the shots at General Walker. This is their evaluation. Now I expect to evaluate their findings a little differently as prior testimony I have been showing the inaccuracies. But since this is the 20th century, I would hope that pictures would do it. I have many pictures in my possession which prove that things are not according to Hoyle. And the main picture I have is a picture of my son, Lee Harvey Oswald, exploited in the February issue of Life magazine 1963 as the assassin and killer of Tippit and the gun. This picture is a fake. I have many articles, many books saying it's a fake. I was told that it was a fake before the Warren Commission, and they go into great detail about this picture and finally come up with one conclusion, that the magazines and newspapers that had this particular photograph admitted that they inadvertently removed some of the parts of the gun from the picture. Now we have 3 or 4 pages on this, and it's very official. And it looks like it's really the truth. I'm sure they were honest about it and they believe it. I'm going to ask one question and answer it myself. Mrs. Oswald, what gives you the authority, just a laywoman, to contradict the Warren report findings where they had experts testing the negatives and the photographs? Well, I went about it in just a little different way. The exact date in April that this photograph was supposed to have been made at 214 Neely Street down in West Texas and taken by my daughter-in-law, Marina Oswald. I took a picture with the same camera. I've proved in 1964 that this picture cannot be taken because of the foliage. I went back in December 1964 and I took the yard again, which showed the same background of the picture in Life magazine. Now in 1965, April, just a few weeks ago, I went back to 214 Neely Street and I took photographs again. I'm in the picture each time. You can see only my face because of the foliage, which has to prove that this picture was taken right before the assassination as a plant or immediately after, which would be in the month of November when the foliage wouldn't be like it would be in April. Now I have these pictures and I would like someone to call my hand on this. Some official, let's get that ball a-rolling. She showed me the photographs of herself amid shrubbery beside a house, but because my recollection of the background in the photograph of Lee was shadowy, I could not be amazed except at the ingenuity and perseverance of her research. The day before, in her excoriation of Mrs. Payne, she had said, and one thing that insults my intelligence, the morning after, when we had left, Marina and I had left with the Life representative at 10:30 that morning. It says that the police came back to the house later on, so she went to the grocery store and told them to go ahead and search the house. Now, I don't know. I just don't swallow some of these things, particularly when they go on and on and on. I don't say isn't possible that a woman would give the police, invite them in and say, you go in the house, I'm going to the grocery store. Well, this was the time they found the pictures. This was the time the police found the pictures that were in the garage when Mrs. Payne wasn't home, and she didn't know anything about the pictures. It's proved in the Warren Commission report that the Dallas police called that night and asked Mr. Payne to come to the station to identify the pictures and told them they found the pictures in his garage. Well, there's much more to this, but this will just give you an idea of the many lies. Her voice was at its most impassioned and her face at its pinkest with indignation when she talked of the pictures, but the enigma is beyond my elucidation. 2. John Edward Pick, in fact, lived on 92nd Street between 1st and 2nd Avenues. Bear in mind that he was stationed on Staten Island, a distance of nearly 15 miles. Mrs. Oswald had an apartment in the Bronx, but one of the jobs she had took her daily to 42nd Street in Manhattan, and at another time she worked at Martin's department store in the downtown section of Brooklyn. So that she must have traveled almost an hour by subway, surely the least agreeable means of transportation in the world. Why did she not get a job nearer her apartment or apartment nearer her job? When she released her son's letters from Russia, she said in her explanatory notes that the reason Lee Harvey had written to her at so many different addresses was that she was a practical nurse and moved from place to place as her services were required. But she was not always a practical nurse, and the Warren Report, as I have indicated, shows that in both New Orleans and Fort Worth, she moved continually. Since the assassination, she has had at least 3 different addresses. One day after I'd been to Dallas, I was lunching in New York with a psychoanalyst friend of mine and mentioned Mrs. Oswald, saying that Freud had said that if there were no persecution, there would be no persecution complex. He told me that Freud had indeed written something in the essay, Certain Neurotic Mechanisms in Jealousy, Paranoia, and Homosexuality, that could be so construed through either, on the one hand, a superficial reading, or on the other, a very attentive one. I have looked at the essay, but I am altogether out of my depth and leave the interpretation to the doctors. What interests me and what interested my friend is how Mrs. Oswald came by this esotericism. For, according to a story that appeared in the New York newspapers, a gun collector named John King claimed that he paid Oswald's widow $10,000 for the Italian Army rifle that killed the president and the .38 that killed Officer Tippit, and he was suing the government for them. They had been in Washington together with all the other evidence accumulated by the Warren Commission, but had then been returned to Dallas, where they were in the custody of the FBI. The Justice Department, in its quite understandable effort to keep the weapons, was being assisted, curiously enough, by the Internal Revenue Service, whose argument was that Oswald falsified papers in buying the guns, and they might thereby be confiscated under the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax Unit. The technicality applies to items for which less than $2,500 was paid, and while King said that he paid $10,000, Oswald is said to have bought the rifle and sniper scope for $19.95 and the pistol for $29.95. On November 2nd, 1965, President Johnson signed a bill authorizing the federal government to take ownership of the rifle that killed President Kennedy. The new legislation authorizes the Attorney General to designate as federal property items of evidence collected by the Warren Commission. And that's going to be it. 2 documents of major interest to all Americans, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's those 2 books again. There's the back cover. If you want to read it, I'm not going to read it. That's all, bros. Goodbye. Goodbye. Don't look at my socks.